Hi, John. This is Chris Pear.
Hey, how?
Good to meet you. The best way we can meet anybody these days.
Okay. I hope I wasn't coming on a little. This is the first time I've worn a tie in several months.
Well, congratulations. One step closer to normalcy.
I
Let's see. John, can you hear us? We just plugged in a new mic.
yes, and I see the picture, the profile picture.
You do a sound settings.
Where's sound settings? Where is that?
So yeah, I think it's in the like go to the menu. I know this is not a Mac. I'm not good at it, but go to the start menu.
Okay.
I think you do settings. I'm sorry.
That's okay. We're not going to do them on the camera.
Okay.
Just unplug this.
Are you guys still there with the governor's office?
Hey, John. Can you hear us?
Hey.
Okay, good. Crisis averted. We'll go grab the governor.
Okay. And are we? I hit the streaming button as soon as I came on, but did you guys see a button like that?
I don't think that we have control.
Okay. I think maybe that was in my control, and I think that we are streaming.
Okay. Yeah, it says live at the top for us too. I appreciate her, attempt to build their own platform, but also makes me nervous.
Yeah.
All right, we're all set.
Water would be great. I got it.
This is John Harris, Governor.
Hi, John Harris.
Can you see me okay? And am I framed all right for you?
Yes.
Okay.
That's my necklace.
I'm just getting a couple messages here from our organizer.
How are you this morning?
I'm just fine, thank you. It's early out there for you folks. I suppose you probably have Mostly early mornings and probably late nights as well these days, right?
Yeah, everything. All of the above.
Governor, I saw in your bio you grew up in Minnesota before you moved out west.
Yes. Family's actually still in the Twin Cities.
Is that right? I'm kind of a surrogate Minnesotan. I went to Carleton down in Northfield.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Friends.
That's where my parents wanted me to go to college. I'm like, no, I'm out of here. Goodbye.
Did you grow up? You went to Moundsville View High School?
Mounds View High School. Do you know Jack Oman, cartoonist for the Sacramento Bee?
I know the name. Yeah, I don't know him.
He and I went to school together. He's enjoying his work very much with Sacramento paper. So
yeah, he can't say that he doesn't have good raw material.
Exactly. And I think the challenge for the world is finding a job where you can actually be a cartoonist and make a living at it at this point.
Well, that's really true, because even some of the really good ones, as their local, the metropolitan dailies got stressed, like some terrific cartoonists found themselves at large.
Yeah, no, it's a huge challenge, I think, for the country. So how are you doing? Are you staying healthy?
We're just fine. It's kind of always a bull market for us in the political realm. We've been surprised to the degree to which, the work that we do is adaptable to this kind of format. I don't like it much personally. I'd rather be in a newsroom, but in terms of being able to do our jobs, it's really hasn't been a huge impediment.
Well, for extroverts like me, it's really challenging, honestly. I've been really lucky because I've had a small team that I've worked with consistently over the last several months. But I'd rather be meeting with students, talking with legislators, working with activists, and, this is Zoom room only. So.
Okay. So, Governor, I think we're just about a minute away, and Frank Richter has said that we should start around 11.
Okay.
One thing I'm not totally sure is the format by which I'm going to see questions, or maybe we'll both see them.
Okay.
But
can we not have it go so low on me?
Why don't?
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
It's going in just a moment. Okay, the questions will appear in the chat, so we're all set. Anyway, Governor, if you're ready, why don't we start up? I imagine we're getting some people joining in the virtual room, and we'll have more as we get going. But Governor Kate Brown, Democratic Governor of Oregon, it's great to be with you this morning, our time, this afternoon in Europe, where many people will be watching this. It's terrific to have a conversation with you, because all governors, I think, in this era of a pandemic face special challenges, unexpected challenges, ones they weren't expecting to face when they came in with whatever their agendas are. That agenda's been, if not hijacked, certainly added to. I think you've got special challenges, as we all know, with the turmoil in Portland. And of course, you were even mentioned in the presidential debate, if that's the right noun for what happened the other night. I can think of other nouns that would work. So anyway, to have a conversation with you about what's going on in Oregon, how you see the national picture, what your leadership challenges are as a governor, I think is a great opportunity for us. I wonder if we could talk a little bit about Oregon, just for starters. I have great associations with the state. I think almost anybody who visits leaves with great associations. Wonderful city of Portland, a great coast, great mountains. I associate Oregon with lattes, with bike trails, with a fantastic coast. And so it's odd for me. I don't fully understand when I read the news and we see Oregon associated with violence, with people on the agitated people on the far right, a number of people very agitated on the left, and mayhem I don't understand it. Could you explain to me what has happened? How did Oregon get like this? And these movements on the left and the right, where do they come from? Presumably they don't come in isolation. They're not simply a Trump phenomenon. There's something more than that.
Well, thank you for talking about the beauty and bounty of Oregon. We're extremely proud of our 362 miles of coastline that are publicly accessible. Obviously, mountains, deserts, forests. We are certainly on the vanguard and have been for a number of decades on issues of progressive public policy. Oregon was the first state in the entire country to pass a land use planning bill. We also were the first state to create the bottle bill, the deposit, when you bring your bottle back or your can back. And more recently, we were at the forefront of elections issues with the passage of our vote by mail in the late 90s and our more recent policy to expand automatic voter registration to ensure that every eligible Oregonian has the opportunity to participate in this very fundamental right. But certainly what is happening here on the ground, and I will say we have frankly limited the number of folks that are engaged in these clashes. It's roughly about 150 folks every single night, both on the right and the left. And I think it's really a illustration or an underpinning of what's happening in our country right now. It is a quest, at least on the ground right here, right now, to eradicate racism in our institutions, in our cultures, and frankly, in our systems. And it is absolutely long overdue. And I'm honestly proud of the work we have done to begin tackling these issues. The legislature has passed over 6 bills to address police brutality and ensure that our law enforcement troops are being held accountable. I have taken the steps to create a racial justice council to begin to center the voices of Black and Brown and Indigenous people in my creation of a budget for the next biennium and for my legislative agenda. Obviously, a lot more work to be done. But clearly what's happening on the ground here is really, I think, an indicator of the challenges that we are facing across the entire country.
You mentioned that the people actually out on the streets or at the forefront of unrest, really only 150 people or so at both sides. I mean, what's your takeaway from that, or what should our takeaway be? Obviously, the issues that people are talking about and identifying are real, but is some of the does the unrest get magnified by the media or the way it plays out and echoes in the political debate? The 150 doesn't sound like very many to me.
If you listen to Trump's Twitter, or if you read Trump's Twitter feed, it sounds like the entire city of Portland is burning. That is clearly not the case. Yes. Are there protests every night? Yes. No question about it. Is there a level of violence happening during those protests? Yes. There's rock throwing. There's fires started in trash cans. There's certainly property destruction and certainly some physical injuries happening. But it certainly is not widespread throughout the entire city. And we're literally talking about 150 to 200 people. Over the weekend, we did have the Proud Boys come to Oregon. This happens every summer. I'm honestly very pleased with how our law enforcement handled the situation. We were expecting over 10,000 people. I declared a state of emergency and created a unified command. So we had both our state troopers, our local sheriff's department, and our Portland Police Bureau all working together collaboratively to address the concerns. They literally had a couple hundred people show up. There were a couple dozen arrests. I speak for many Oregonians when I say that white supremacy, these hate nationalists, are not tolerated in this state. And frankly, they should not be tolerated in this country. Unfortunately, our president obviously disagrees.
Mm-hmm. I will say to people watching, in the spirit of conversation, just send messages or comments as you have them, so we can get a conversation going. As a moderator, I never like to just hold questions to the end. I like to weave them in throughout. And we do have one observation of somebody that we want to talk. They want to hear about Oregon broadly, not just Portland. I think that's a good point that Paul Sinar, who's I think listening in New York, says that Oregon's a lot more than just just Portland. Tell me what you have learned in these recent weeks of unrest that would apply in other places to other governors if they find this situation. And incidentally, is what's happening in Portland, could that happen in any city? Are the conditions, or are there unique conditions about Portland that's made this happen? Should any governor of any state be thinking, under the right set of circumstances, I could have the same problem that the Oregon governor does?
Well, I think there's absolutely no question that this is happening in cities around the entire country, and it's a wake-up call for all of us that we all need to recommit ourselves to tackling the issues of racism in our education system, in our healthcare system, in our criminal justice system. And I count myself amongst the many, frankly, white politicians in this country who haven't done enough to tackle these issues. And so, yes, I know that my governors across the entire country are working on these issues based on, the states and the communities that they're in. But we've had multiple layers of challenges here in my state. In addition to the pandemic and the issues of social unrest, we've just seen in the last couple of weeks historically devastating wildfires, particularly impacting our rural communities. We had a historic wind event over the Labor Day weekend that caused so many fires. I think we still haven't counted them all. And it devastated very small communities in the mid-Willamette Valley and in southern Oregon. Literally, the towns of Phoenix and Talent have been wiped out entirely. And I think for me, the lessons from all of this is that it is absolutely so key that we put aside our political differences, not only in Oregon, but across the country, and work together to build a better Oregon, a better country, a more resilient country, a country that is more just and equitable for everyone. And I think one of the lessons for me that I look forward to sharing with my fellow governors is that conversation and dialogue are truly the most productive way of problem solving. And I'll go to the situation where we had literally Trump's troops on the streets of Portland after there were some issues around a federal courthouse. The president sent in Department of Homeland Security officers, ICE, Border Patrol, and others. And the protests grew from a couple hundred to thousands of Oregonians who were outraged at the behavior. We literally had federal officers picking up Oregonians and putting them into unmarked vans. Mm-hmm. What I did following...
Actually, because you're very much on point to a question that comes from a professor of philosophy, I assume in Germany, who's watching us, Hans Kirchler. And he says, why is it difficult to prevent and contain this violence? Why is there not constructive engagement with the federal government on this? And I thought you were on the theme of what he was asking. I thought I'd pose his question directly. Why is it? It seems like the federal government, from what you're saying, is exacerbating the situation rather than helping contain it.
In terms of the protests in Portland, there's absolutely no question that the federal government is exacerbating the situation, and our president in particular is doing it intentionally on multiple multiple levels. I just mentioned sending in federal troops. I called them Trump's troops because that's literally what they were. Instead of 150 protesters, we all of a sudden had 1,500 and 5,000. Oregonians were outraged that our federal government was engaging in this type of behavior. But I will also say there's a lot of frustration.
With President Trump directly during any of this?
I did not speak with President Trump. I was just going to say, however, I did reach out to a couple of key folks in the administration, the Vice President Mike Pence. I would put him in a category I call connector. If he can't help you solve a problem, he gets you to the right people. He connected me to the president's chief of staff, and through productive conversations and conversations with folks on the ground, we were able to resolve the situation. We came up with an agreement that our Oregon State police officers would protect the federal courthouse for a period of a couple weeks, and that calmed things down substantially. But let me share another circumstance where I think the federal government failed in its leadership, and that's throughout the pandemic. You mentioned governors. We have truly been on the front lines of this pandemic, struggling about how to get adequate personal protective equipment, how to get testing capacity ramped up. In countries where they have been successful tackling the coronavirus, this pandemic, they have a national response. I think by any measure, you can say that the United States of America had no federal response to this pandemic. And I would argue that Trump sending troops to Portland was a distraction from his failure to lead this country through this pandemic. And we are seeing it today in terms of our death toll. We're now at 200,000 in terms of the number of people who've been impacted by this pandemic, and in terms of the challenges that our communities are facing. Yeah. So the irony of all of this, the protests, the social unrest, and the pandemic, is that we truly have needed federal assistance. And where we really needed it throughout the pandemic, we didn't have it.
And if we'd had a really, what you would see as a really enlightened policy from the federal government, what tangible help would you have gotten?
That's a really good question. We know early on that countries that substantially ramped up testing efforts, they saw the ability to identify cases early and quarantine, isolate folks. We know that countries that provided support, both financial and wraparound services to families when they were impacted by the virus, that they were able to contain it easily and quickly. And particularly in countries in Southeast Asia where they began wearing face coverings, they didn't, and obviously it is more common in those cultures than it is in the United States. They didn't have the significant case counts that we have seen in the United States of America, where contrary to science, our president has been spreading misinformation throughout this entire pandemic. And I think I read there's a word for it. It's called infodemic. He is responsible for the majority of misinformation regarding the pandemic in this country.
You know, we've got a question. I think it's from Indonesia, because the person mentions having two Indonesian friends in Portland. And they ask a question about just how fragile do you see the social fabric in the United States in the wake of this election. And I must have, just to add to that, listening to you, one does get a sense of the country just really dancing kind of recklessly on the edge of catastrophe with racial and political unrest. You mentioned these horrific wildfires that that are all over the West, and including in Oregon. And all of a sudden, this country, which we think of as being very stable, feels awfully, awfully fragile. How fragile and how combustible are we? And particularly in the context of an election result that may not be known with finality on late in the night of November 3rd?
Look, there's absolutely no question that the social fabric of our country is frayed right now. And that's why, for me, I think it's incredibly important that the foundation of our democracy remains strong. And that's why I'm working with a number of my governors. I know that secretaries of state, including the Secretary of State here in Oregon, who oversees elections, are working really, really hard to make sure that every eligible Oregonian, and with my fellow governors, every eligible American, has the opportunity to vote, whether it's at home via the mail or going to a polling place, and that vote is actually counted. And I think it is extremely damaging to our country that the president is using government to undermine democracy, to suppress the vote, and frankly, sow the seeds of doubt in his supporters about the outcome of the election.
Governor, in Oregon, you no longer can vote in person, right? You're 100% by mail?
We are considered 100% vote by mail, vote at home. We're the first state in the country to do that, but you can also vote in person. And I think we've seen, I mentioned the towns of Phoenix and Talent in Southern Oregon, extensive damage due to wildfire, Detroit, other communities, Vida, Blue River, destroyed by the fires. These folks can still vote. They can have a ballot sent to the elections office where they can pick it up there. Where they're staying, they can get the ballot. Or frankly, they can go to their local elections office and vote in person. Because in Oregon, we believe that your vote is your voice and that every single voice matters and that our democracy is stronger when all of us can participate.
So here's a practical question. Are there, in fact, logistical challenges to vote by mail that election officials in other states are going to have to deal with, just as a practical matter? And with President Trump, raising questions about the legitimacy of vote by mail, is that total BS in your view, or are there, in fact, things that we should be aware of, the presumably manageable problems, but nonetheless actual problems?
So I would just say that the president knows nothing about vote by mail, vote at home, and he's extremely hypocritical on the topic because he himself votes by mail, and I know that members of his cabinet are voting by mail as well. We have had vote by mail for 30 years. I will tell you that our Republican and Democratic secretaries of state, it was actually a Republican secretary of state that promoted the idea. And the goal was literally to put a ballot in the hands of every eligible Oregonian. Are there issues? Yes, because our president is intentionally undermining the U.S. Postal Service. Right now, more than 50% of Oregon voters cast their ballot via a drop box. I think a practical issue is, do we have enough drop boxes across the state? Probably not. I'd like to see more. I know that our county clerks are working to make that happen. Mostly, it is really important way for our rural voters to vote. To vote at home through the mail is very convenient and accessible. So literally, our president is denying or reducing access to many of his own voters, which makes no sense whatsoever. The other issues with vote by mail include many states still require a stamp on the ballot. I consider it similar to a poll tax, certainly not as egregious. We in Oregon and Washington State as well now automatically provide postage on the ballot, so folks don't have to worry about that.
Governor, someone in our audience notes that vote by mail can be made more secure with a digital verification. Does that take place in Oregon? Do you know? We have a barcode, and we verify every single signature
And there's other methodologies to ensure the integrity of the vote. We also do audits, essentially recounts, random recounts after every single election. For example, they might pick the president's race in one county, a ballot measure race, and a local city council, and they go through and verify the results. But guess what? Paper ballots are not hackable, and you can verify and replicate the results. And given this day and age, with the Russian interference in our elections in the 2016 election cycle, and frankly, technology, I think paper ballots are honestly verifiable and tried and true. The other thing I would say about vote at home, vote by mail is that with the global pandemic happening, Oregonians, Americans don't have to put their lives and their health at risk by going to a polling place.
Governor, I'm going to, in a moment, to turn to business because we're getting a number of questions from people who are themselves business professionals, and I want to turn to that. But before we leave election, what is your expectation as somebody who's a professional politician and is watching the situation nationally? What are we likely to know on November 3rd? And should we be preparing ourselves not for election day, but election week or possibly even election month?
Absolutely. We know in Oregon, a vote by mail sometimes takes a couple of days to complete the results. It's fair to say that, at least in an election, that it's more important that the results be accurate than that they be quick and speedy. And I know this from my own experience. As a young candidate, I ran for the House. I had a very hotly contested election, and I literally won that race by 7 votes. 7 votes.
Putting it awfully close there.
Yes. I'm living proof that your vote really does matter, and every voice has to be heard, and every ballot needs to be counted. So the results need to be accurate. So I think the question is, are we willing to wait and ensure the accuracy of the results? And the answer is yes, we must. But I think it's really important for Americans to make a plan to vote. How are you going to vote? If you're going to the polls, do you have adequate time? We know that particularly in Republican states, there have been intentional efforts to restrict access to the ballot. Legislation in North Carolina to Texas to Kansas is making it more difficult for people of color, for victims of domestic violence, for seniors, for students to vote. And so I'm encouraging everyone to have a plan. And then I'm working with my fellow governors to make sure that we have plans in place to ensure the integrity and security of the election, as well as should there be issues arising following Election Day.
You know, you mentioned other governors. That's something I'm curious about because things are so partisan in so many arenas of American life. Do you have relationships and friendships with Republican governors?
Absolutely. I have to tell you, one of the joys of being a governor is that you can literally work across the aisle. And my fellow governors have provided support to one another during the pandemic, during these wildfires, during the horrific natural disasters that have been happening. As a great example, Roy Cooper in North Carolina and Ron DeSantis in Florida sent teams of firefighters to help us during the wildfires. We typically send teams of firefighters to help them during hurricane season. So we help each other out. As governors, we have to GSD, get stuff done, and we have to be pragmatic and realistic. I will tell you that Larry Hogan, Governor Hogan of Maryland, was the chair of the National Governors Association, red or blue governor. I think we all reached out to him to get his support, ask for information during the pandemic. Certainly, it's strengthened these relationships. Unfortunately, that's one of the silver linings of this pandemic.
So we've got on business themes. There's a question here from Robert Kahn, and he said he recalls attending a breakfast by the Portland Chamber of Commerce in 1991. He thinks it was Attorney General Bill Barr was the speaker, and he says he was unimpressed with Attorney General Barr, at least on the first run around. We don't know. He hasn't commented on whether he feels the second tenure is better or worse. But he was impressed at that time with the public-private partnerships in Oregon, and he's curious for an update on that. And I might throw in another question that's on a related theme. Somebody's wondering, what has the Oregon government done to help small businesses during the pandemic?
All right. Well, that's two questions that I could spend hours talking about. I'll just go to small businesses first, because they are truly the heart and soul of Oregon's economy. And I think they're part of what makes Oregon's culture so unique. We pride ourselves on our creativity, our innovation, and I'll just say this, mavericks. You talked about our bike-friendly communities. We pride ourselves on our microbrews and our, I would argue, world-famous Pinot Noirs. We are also doing really well in the cheese culture as well. And our environment makes us want to show off. We were one of the states that started the farm to table movement through one of our local restaurants by the name of Higgins. But all of this lends itself to creativity and innovation, and we capture that in our small business climate. During the pandemic, we did a number of things, including setting up a hotline so that small businesses could call in and help out. I worked when I was Secretary of State to create the Small Business Advocate in the Secretary of State's office. We are collaborating in that work to make sure that our small businesses have the support, the tools, the resources they need to thrive. We're hoping to expand. A lot of states do small business shopping on the Friday after Thanksgiving. We're hoping to expand that so that Oregonians will continue to shop at small businesses now through the end of the year and support these job creators. So all of the above, we think our small businesses are critically important to our economy, as well as also create jobs, not just in cities like Portland, but in smaller communities like Pendleton and Ontario and Klamath Falls. In terms of public-private partnerships, there's absolutely no question that these are what sustain us as a state. I'm so excited to see that our nonprofit organizations here in Oregon have really stepped up and are raising money to help the communities that have been devastated by these wildfires. To date, have raised over $5 million. Our business community, from Nike on down, have made significant investments to help to support the families devastated by the wildfires, and they are many. Roughly over 4,000 Oregonians have lost their homes. So it is only through working together collaboratively, collectively, that we can rebuild a stronger Oregon. And it's going to be a public-private partnership, both the private sector and the nonprofit sector as well, all coming together to help their fellow Oregonians.
Governor, we've got just a couple minutes left, and just a couple final questions. One theme of your remarks, it seems to me, if I'm hearing correctly, is that the actual electorate and the actual leaders who are in charge of solving problems, whether Democratic or Republican, are actually less divided. They're more practical, less ideological than the picture of our politics that gets created by the most extreme voices. If I'm correct in discerning that theme, there's a question here from Robert Rubenstein. He's the chairman of the TBLI group, and wonders whether you might expect more states to move towards ranked choice voting, like Maine has in the future. That's one response that people have had to say, look, the divisions are being exaggerated by the way we vote, and a more rational way of voting might have incentives more toward the center, where most people are. I'm curious what you think of that.
So I am watching ranked choice play out in the state of Maine. We also have a couple communities here in Oregon that have moved forward with ranked choice. And my observation is that, generally speaking, as it's played out in other countries, what it does is create a more diverse leadership, elected leadership. And I think that's critically important, that our leadership reflect the diversity of our communities. And we know that when we have a more diverse leadership, the public policies that we develop are more resilient, they're more reflective of the communities, and frankly, more respectful of the communities. So I'm going to be watching Maine with great interest. But I would also say that we can't just stop there. I think there needs to be a number of changes in our election system if we really want to engage the American electorate. How we vote, making sure it's accessible and convenient to all eligible Americans. We have a voter registration system that is designed to keep many voices out, and that must change. I would look to what we did in Oregon with our opt-out system of automatic voter registration as the model. How we vote, we've talked about vote by mail, voting from home, the convenience and accessibility and the safety. But we can't stop there. It also needs to go to how we finance campaigns. We have a ballot measure to allow for campaign finance reform in Oregon on the ballot in November. But obviously, I believe this country needs to take a look at Citizens United and the ability of many, frankly, to pour millions of dark dollars into these campaigns. Redistricting, another issue that we need to examine. I think all of these need to be discussed if we want to have a fully engaged electorate, and frankly, if we want to have elected officials that truly reflect the diversity of our country.
Governor, I want to be respectful of your time and the people in the audience's time. So maybe I could have a question for you to offer some summary thoughts. And it would be this: if I could get you to sort of cast your mind forward with what you expect to happen. Listening to you or just reading the news on Politico or anywhere else these days, it's very easy to get pessimistic. We're so divided as a country. We've got such immediate problems relating to race, relating to the pandemic and the economic and public health effects that has, and that's saying nothing about the longer term problems like climate change. Very, very easy to get pessimistic, but invite you to give us some things to be optimistic about. And maybe in that you could also tell us what you expect relating to the coronavirus. When are we going to be past this in a way where it's no longer the preoccupying subject for people in their daily lives or people like you who have responsibilities for states? We'll gaze into the crystal ball for a moment, and if you can, and do so honestly, give us something to feel a little better about.
Well, I'll just talk about the pandemic first, and I'm a fan of Dr. Fauci. I expect that over the next few months, we will start to have access to a vaccine. I think what's most important is that we ensure that this vaccine is accessible to our communities that were hardest hit by the pandemic, and that's our communities of color and our low-income communities. I suspect we're probably on a year trajectory in terms of the pandemic. But we are beginning to and learning more about the virus and learning how to deal with it from a medical perspective. And I think that's a good thing. And I think we're learning as we move along. At the outset, we were not wearing masks. Now, many of us are. The science behind it is very clear. So I'm confident that in addition to vaccines, we will develop other tools and other ways of addressing the pandemic so that we can protect our most vulnerable Oregonians and our most vulnerable Americans. So it's not going to be easy. There are a few silver linings. As I said, Republican and Democratic governors working together. I think telehealth for our rural Americans has shined throughout this pandemic. And I think that you're going to see other ways of culture change that will help us address it as we move forward. In terms of the election, I would just say this. I am living proof that each one of us can make a difference. I mentioned earlier, John, that I won my first race by 7 votes. And I will tell you that decades later, I still have people say to me, Governor Brown, I was your 7th vote. I was the reason that you won. Each person believes that they made a difference. And I would say this to every American, vote. Your vote truly does matter, and you can make a difference in this election by participating in this very fundamental act of democracy. It is not a spectator sport. We have to engage. And I think if we can all do that, America will continue to shine, and that we will continue to be a leader for the entire world.
All right. Well, great words to close on. Governor, thank you very much for your time and for such interesting and candid answers. And thanks to everyone in the audience. I was able to get several questions, a couple that I didn't get, but a very energizing conversation. And I hope when we get the green light, I can come visit you in Oregon.
We'd love to have you sample our famous Pinot Noir.
I've already done that, including during the pandemic. It would be nice to tour the vineyards in person. Thanks so much, Governor. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Be safe out there.